Miss Olivia De Havilland.
I have perfectly wonderful memories of the filming of Gone with the Wind, as fresh and alive as the movie itself. I thought that you might like to know something about what it was like to play the role of Melanie and to be part of making this wonderful film. To begin with, in the summer of 1936, the entire world was reading Margaret Mitchell's book, and I was doing the same thing. It was the character of Melanie that attracted me most because of her admirable qualities and the values that meant so much to her and meant so much to me. I wanted to perpetuate these values. And the perfect way to do that, of course, would be to play the role of Melanie. But there was no way I could do that. No way I could fulfill this dream, because I was under long-term contract to Warner Brothers Studio, and Gone with the Wind was going to be made by an entirely different studio, Selznick International. But then, one day, the telephone rang, and the voice at the other end of the line said, "Is this Mr. Havilland?" And I said, "Yes." And the voice said, "You don't know me. We've never met. But I am George Cukor, the director of Gone with the Wind." He then said, "Would you be interested in playing the part of Melanie?" I said I certainly would. Then he said, "Would you consider doing something entirely illegal?" I said, "I might." And then he said, "It would be illegal for you to come over to Selznick Studios and read for the part. Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, "Indeed, I would." So Mr. Cukor gave me the address of the studio, where, he said, someone would be waiting for me to lead me to his office. Well, very illegally, I followed those instructions, arrived on time, and who was waiting for me there? This rotund gentleman with close-cropped, very frizzy, dark hair. He was very welcome, very kind, and said, "I'm George Cukor." He asked of me if I would just look over several pages of Melanie's dialogue and then read them to him. Now, at the end of this reading, he said, "I think David Selznick must hear you read." On the following Sunday afternoon, I set off for David Selznick's colonial mansion in Beverly Hills. Well, I had committed to memory the scene which George wanted me to play. It was a scene with Scarlett O'Hara, and George, with his rotund silhouette, was to play Scarlett, and I was going to play Melanie to George. Well, Mr. Selznick stood just about 2 feet away from us as we began the scene. Now, George gave the most passionate performance of Scarlett ever seen, clutching the portraits. As I played to his Scarlett, passionate Scarlett, some part of my brain could not help but think, this is certainly the most comic scene ever seen in the entire world. I couldn't understand how David Selznick could keep his face straight. But he was not only kept his face straight, but he was enraptured by the scene. And when it was over, he said, "I think we found our Melanie." Mr. Selznick and Mr. Cukor conferred a minute and said, "Now, how are we going to approach Jack Warner?" Which meant, in spite of everything, they had chosen me. Well, negotiations with Jack Warner were begun. And Mr. Warner said no, flatly no, he was not going to lend me to David Selznick for the role of Melanie. I went to see Jack Warner, and I pleaded with him. I implored him to let me go to Selznick Studios to play Melanie. He said, "Well, you don't want to play Melanie. Scarlett's the role." I said, "I don't want Scarlett. I want to play Melanie." He was adamant, did not change his mind. I was desperate. I had to do something. I had to think of something to do that would bring negotiations to a favorable conclusion. And then I did something that I shouldn't have done. I was a star, that's true, but I was a little star, a sort of mini-star. Nonetheless, I called the boss's wife, Mrs. Warner, Anne Warner, a beautiful, elegant, kind, and warm-hearted woman. And I asked her if she would consider having tea with me one afternoon at the Beverly Hills Brown Derby. And she said yes. So we met on a rainy afternoon at the Beverly Hills Brown Derby and drank tea together. And I told her my story. She was very sympathetic. And when I said, "Would you help me achieve the role of Melanie?" And she said, "I understand you, and I will help you." And she succeeded. And before you knew it, Jack Warner was signing the papers with Selznick Studios to allow me to go to that lot and play Melanie. And so the day came when I first reported legally to Selznick Studios. It was for makeup and hairdress tests. And George Cukor, who was so wonderfully perceptive, said to me, he said, "You know, we can give you hairdressers, coiffures, and costumes and makeup that will make you look pretty, or they will make you look plain. And of course, as a young star, your appearance is extremely important to you and to your career, and you must decide whether Melanie should be pretty or plain." And I said, plain, because that's the way she was drawn in the book. And I wanted to be faithful to Melanie in every way. Well, we did make some tests of Melanie wearing curls and that sort of thing. Oh, very becoming. And then finally, following exactly the description which Margaret Mitchell gives of Melanie's hairdress, we tested one with the middle parting, the hair coming down smoothly like wings on either side of Melanie's, a widow's peak. Now, I didn't have a widow's peak, so very delicately the makeup man penciled in a widow's peak. And that's the hairdress that we chose, David Selznick and George Cukor chose for the film, and Melanie wears it from beginning to end. neck, the soft dove gray color, little ruffles here, I think around the wrist too. But there were ruffles too, larger ones, at the bottom of the skirt. There were 4 ruffles. I loved every detail of the costume except the 4th ruffle. I thought that's one ruffle too many. One ruffle too many. But I didn't dare mention this to Walter Plunkett, for whom I had so much respect. We then went to David Selznick's office, because when you had your final fitting with every single costume in the film, you presented yourself wearing the costume to David Selznick for his approval. So in I went to his office, hoping that David would say, not 4 ruffles, 3. Well, I turned around this way, and I turned around that way. He said, all right, that's my okay. You may leave. So I turned toward the doorway, and I was halfway out of his office when he said, just a minute. Come back. Turn around. I did. And he said, not 4 ruffles, 3. Wasn't that wonderful? The first day of shooting on the Selznick lot was the first scene in the film. The scene on the veranda tower where Scarlett is conversing with the Tarleton twins. And she is saying, whoa,
whoa, whoa, whoa. This war talk's spoiling all the fun at every party this spring. I get so bored I could scream.
I went to the set that day. Of course, I was not in that scene, but I wanted to wish everyone good luck and to be part of the first day of our creating this golden world which we inhabited for the next 5 months. We went on happily and harmoniously filming Gone with the Wind until one day I walked on the set to film the bizarre sequence. I was dressed in mourning. I greeted Scarlett this day, Vivian. She was in a state of terrible distress, and she gave me the most frightful news. She said, George Cukor is leaving the film, and he is going to be replaced by Victor Fleming. Now, neither she nor I had ever met Victor Fleming, and by this, our characters had so far been developed under George's wonderfully sure hand. We had so much confidence in him that we didn't see how we could play satisfactorily our roles with anyone else. So she said, let's go and see David. So the 2 of us went together in our widow's weeds to call on Mr. Selznick. And for 3 hours, we beseeched, we implored, we pleaded with David Selznick to please keep George on the film. We even drew out our black-bordered handkerchiefs. Tears rolled down our cheeks. He finally said, I'm terribly sorry. I understand how you feel, but I am not going to change my mind. Victor Fleming is to be the director from now on of Gone with the Wind. And so we left David's office weeping with our handkerchiefs, disconsolate and despairing. And then a marvelous thing happened that night. I had an engagement to dine with Howard Hughes. I was still wearing my makeup when I joined him at a little restaurant near the studio, and I told him this tragic tale. And he, with remarkable insight, said to me, "Don't worry. With George and Victor, it's the same talent. Only Victor's is strained through a coarser sieve." They were wonderfully reassuring words, and later Victor proved them true. The first scene that Victor directed, in which Melanie appears, was the scene at 12 Oaks in the great entrance hall where Ashley and Melanie are greeting their friends, the announcement of their engagement just having been made, and a great barbecue being held in their honor. Now, I played that scene in rehearsal, greeting Scarlett in a warm and friendly way. We were friends. We hadn't seen each other recently, but I was happy to see her, and it was a social situation. I played it in a polite and very friendly way. Now, after that first rehearsal, Victor Fleming, with immense tact, came up to me and he said, "Please come aside for a minute." And he drew me about 12 paces away, and he said, "Whatever Melanie says, she means. Now go back and play the scene again and mean it." So I did go back, and I did express this piece of direction. And of course, it worked wonderfully.
You're so serious. Oh, Scarlett, you have so much life. I've always admired you so. I wish I could be more like you. You mustn't flatter me, Melanie, and say things you don't mean.
Nobody could accuse Melanie of being insincere. Could they, Mike?
And I never forgot that piece of direction. I kept it, of course, as an integral part of Melanie's character and the interpretation. And it's really something one should remember in playing any part. And so Victor Fleming won my total confidence and maintained it straight through the film. Clark Gable, who had worked with Victor Fleming and who I think felt more comfortable with Victor Fleming on the film, had an enormous responsibility playing Red Butler. And he felt this very, very deeply. His whole career depended on his performance as Red Butler. And the entire world, having read the book, had formed a clear image of Red Butler. Could Clark live up to that image? If he didn't, his career would have been finished, over. He felt this, as I say, terribly, terribly keenly. And this humility in him was an immensely appealing thing. He won the admiration of all of us. Sometimes between scenes, while we were waiting for the lights to be set up, and very often that was a very long procedure, he would withdraw to a quiet corner of the set and there play a board game called Battleship with Vivian. They taught me how to play it, and I became fairly adept, and I won a few battleship tours. I noticed something very remarkable about Vivian. She could play that game of Battleship. Usually she would keep her costume on between setups. And then when the assistant director gave us, say, 10 minutes notice, and then 5, she would get up from the Battleship, go out to the set. A makeup person would pat her nose, someone would do something with her hair, and she would go straight into the scene, playing Scarlett without any moment of transition and doing it superbly. I couldn't do that. I had to have 20 minutes notice from the assistant director, and I would then put on my costume. I needed those minutes alone in the dressing room to recapture the character of Melanie. And those costumes were so sensitively and wonderfully designed by Walter Plunkett that I would turn to the mirror once I had put the costume on again, and I would look and see in that mirror, in that costume, with that middle parting and the wings of hair coming down on either side of Melanie's face, what did I see in the mirror but Melanie? And she and I became one again.
Scarlett loves you a great deal, much more than she knows.
If that were only true, I could wait forever. If she'd only forgive me, forget this ever happened.
She will. You must be patient.
No, it's not possible. You don't understand. If you only knew who she really loved. You wouldn't believe it.
Surely you haven't listened to idle gossip. No, Captain Butler. I wouldn't believe it.
With all her qualities, one of which I discovered was a kind of inner security that she had. I found that, and very luckily was able to experience it. I think, too, another of her great qualities was that she was a perfectly loving woman. And it may be that it was that perfect lovingness on her part that gave her that sense of security, inner security. But the story of Gone with the Wind allowed Melanie only 2 beautiful costumes, and these were, of course, designed with exquisite sensitivity and taste by Walter Plunkett. Now, the first costume, of course, was the lovely gray organdy dress, in which Melanie makes her entrance with its very large hoop. And the second was the pale blue taffeta, which Melanie wears to Scarlett's wedding. It was so lovely. A little V-neck trimmed with lace, and little puff sleeves also trimmed with lace, and then this glorious wide skirt over a very large hoop. I so loved wearing that dress, and I wanted it to be presented in the most favorable way. I couldn't wait for that scene, because I knew from then on it was going to be a very different story as far as Melanie's wardrobe was concerned. Well, the day came when we were shooting this particular scene, and we rehearsed. Of course, you know, Melanie has to pass along the receiving line and shake hands with Scarlett and Charles Hamilton, and we found that the camera couldn't handle all these hoop skirts. We couldn't get the characters together closely if Melanie were wearing her full hoop skirt off off that hoop skirt had to come, and the poor skirt of Melanie's beautiful costume just hung limply like that. And that was the fate of this beautiful costume. During the very last weeks of Gone with the Wind, there were none of my scenes scheduled. But I learned that toward the end of June, what would be Vivian's last shooting date. And so I went to the studio and to the set to wish her farewell and Godspeed. I passed her on the set. She was wearing the faded mauve cotton dress that Scarlett wears at Tara during the most difficult years of the war between the states. And I didn't recognize Vivian. She'd lost so much weight. Her strength seemed to have been so profoundly depleted. But the next day, she was certainly strong enough to get on that plane and make her flight toward New York City in reunion with Larry. And so the filming of Gone with the Wind came to an end. Months later, the premiere of Gone with the Wind was scheduled. The date chosen was December 15th, 1939, and the place was Atlanta, Georgia, the theater, Lowe's Theater. This was an immensely daring choice for David Selznick, because he would be presenting this film about the South, about the war between the states, about Atlantans, to them. Their war, their struggles, their story. Would they accept us? Would they accept the film? It was a tremendously suspenseful occasion. Well, Jack Warner said I couldn't go to the premiere. And I thought, well, I am going to the premiere. And I did go to the premiere.
As distinguished visitors arrive, headed by producer David Selznick and screen stars Olivia De Havilland and Vivian Lee.
Now, the opening, the premiere, was a most festive, gala, and elegant occasion. All the men wore white tie and tails. All the ladies, not only long evening dresses, but long gloves as well. Well, we arrived at the theater. Jock Whitney and I took our seats. I sat to his right. To his left was Margaret Mitchell, and to her left was her husband, John Marsh. Well, the great moment came when the lights dimmed and Gone with the Wind flashed upon the screen. The audience was spellbound. Spellbound. Absolute silence reigned until the scene, the great panoramic scene at the Atlanta depot, where we see laid on stretchers, row upon row upon row of wounded Confederate soldiers. And I heard John Marsh say to Margaret Mitchell, "Why, if we'd had that many soldiers, we'd have won the war." Finally, the film came to an end, and the lights went up, and not a sound could be heard. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. And then, all of a sudden, as one, the whole audience rose and began to clap and clap and clap and clap and clap. And then we knew that Gone with the Wind was a success and would have a long and happy life. In 1961, David, Vivian, and I kept a final rendezvous in Atlanta, the city where our story began. Gone with the Wind was to be premiered yet again in honor of the centennial of the commencement of the war between the states. But this time, Margaret Mitchell was gone. Clark Gable was gone. Leslie was gone. Hattie McDaniel was gone. And then the film flashed upon the screen, and there they were, in all their vibrant life, in joyful reunion, and we were together again. We never imagined in 1939 that our film, Gone with the Wind, would endure decade after decade after decade. But it has, and it will no doubt endure for many, many decades to come.